Oh, there's the shake, and that means we're good and we're live. Welcome to episode 3 of the Fifth Down podcast. Again, like in the title and what we've said, we're going to be talking week 17 that just happened, previewing week 18, which will start here in a few days. But let's start things off with who's in and who's not after week 17. Clinching the number 1 seed is the Baltimore Ravens and the San Francisco 49ers for the playoffs, thanks to their dominant wins this past week. And the Kansas City Chiefs outing the Bengals, eliminating them from the playoffs, clinches the 3rd seed, letting them rest people for the bye also. Also, the Detroit Lions are locked in to the 3 seed, unless somehow Dallas and Philadelphia also lose this week, which is highly doubtful. They are mainly locked into that 3 seed. Rams also have clinched a playoff spot. The Browns have clinched a playoff spot, and now we're just waiting to see how the rest of the AFC shakes out, as well as the NFC. Got a lot of people coming in and out of the playoffs. Had to write a few of these scenarios down because it's so many people down to the last minute. But that's what we're going to start with today, as we normally do. We're going to kick off with the AFC side of things. Your number 1 seed is going to be the Baltimore Ravens. Your number 2 seed is going to be the winner of the Miami Dolphins and Buffalo Bills. Looks like that's been scheduled for Sunday Night Football. Like I said, 3 seed locked in. Kansas City Chiefs, whether they win, lose, or draw this week against the Chargers, they're not going to move at all. So they are locked in, and they have already reportedly started sitting players like Patrick Mahomes. I'm not sure if they've decided to sit Pacheco or not. I've not seen that come across my wire. The 4 seed is obviously going to be somebody who wins the South. It's a 3-team race still with everybody tied up. We got a dedicated segment to that here in a few minutes, so stick with us and I'll walk you through some of those scenarios. 5 seed guaranteed, Cleveland Browns. Baltimore's win eliminated Cleveland from being able to get into the division title. But 5 seed is the Browns, and they are also resting people. I know for a fact they're resting Joe Flacco going into their first round of the playoffs as they play the Bengals this week. After that, right now, as things stand, the 6 seed is the Buffalo Bills, and the 7 seed is the Indianapolis Colts. But as we get into some of the discussion, I'm going to tell you how that's going to probably, in my opinion, shake up, change, and going to depend on how a few things go. So, as we look right here in the AFC, like I said, Dolphins and Bills. That's going to determine who wins the AFC East. Comes down, all the marbles on the line, Week 18. They flex that to the Sunday Night Football slot. That is in Miami, if I do recall correctly. So, the Dolphins win, they get the 2 seed. They get to host most everything at home outside of the AFC title game. The Bills also have that on the line. But, depending on how the Steelers game goes, they could either be... Sorry, folks. They could either be all the way up to the 2 seed or all the way out of the playoffs, as you've probably heard on and off. I'm going to go over some of that starting right about now. So, the Bills passed to the playoffs. It's been a rocky one. They've been in, they've been out, they've been trying to claw their way back in because of a Dolphins loss last week. Like I said a few times already, this is winner take all for the Bills, potentially. So, if the Bills win, they're the AFC East champion. The Dolphins will slide down to the 6 seed. If the Bills lose and the Pittsburgh Steelers beat the Baltimore Ravens, who are playing their backups, the Buffalo Bills will miss the playoffs entirely. So, if you're a Bills fan, you're absolutely hoping the Ravens backup can upset the Steelers. They're currently favored right now. The Pittsburgh Steelers are, because they're going to rest Lamar Jackson. They've already committed to that. So the Steelers, with Mason Rudolph as their starting quarterback, is going to try to go and beat Baltimore already again. I believe they beat them the first time. But the Steelers, if they win, changes that AFC East to the Bills win, you get the division. The Bills lose, you're out of the playoffs entirely. I know a lot of people have the Bills ranked really high right now. They've had 2 very uninspiring performances against Easton Sticks Chargers and the Bailey Zappi New England Patriots. So, if you're the Bills, you're obviously rooting for the Ravens to beat the Steelers. That way you have, at the worst, a guaranteed 6 seed. The way the AFC is kind of worked out, a lot of these tiebreakers, that's why the Bills are going to be out. I believe it's off of their conference record, if anybody was wondering why the Bills would be out and the Steelers would be in with a similar record. It doesn't sound like it, but the way the tiebreakers work. So yeah, the Dolphins got absolutely blown out. I believe it was 59-19 by the Baltimore Ravens. They've got a lot to prove. They have to bounce back against the Bills. If they don't, and they fall basically flat against another good team, the only good team they've beaten is Dallas, and that was kind of a wonky game. That was really close. If the Dolphins come out flat against the Buffalo Bills for the division on the line, something they have not won since, I believe, 2008 when Brady tore his Achilles week 1. If they come out flat, you almost have to wonder what's next. Because now you're going to have to go into Kansas City as the 6th seed when you could have been hosting either the Colts or the Steelers or somebody at home in Miami and do your best to make it to the second round and see what happens. But as it stands right now, I do believe the Dolphins will get this done. They will be the 2 seed. I do believe the Bills will lose, and I will get into it later. I think they're going to be out of the playoffs for it because I do believe Tomlin and the Steelers will beat the Ravens' backups. So the Bills will miss the playoffs according to my projections this week. I don't know how close that game may or may not be. Buffalo has not been beaten by more than 6 points in, I believe, the past 2 seasons. So they don't get blown out. But if there's a team right now that could blow them out, it'd be Miami. And we talk about Miami not doing too good last week. The Bills, they get a bunch of turnovers, and they are miraculously still in a close game with Bailey Zappi and the water gun Patriots offense somehow still being able to make that a competitive game. This does not bode well, in my opinion, for the Bills. They cannot string good games together, and they've barely strung bad games together the past 2 weeks. So, yes, the official prediction for the Fifth Down podcast, the way it's going to go, is the Dolphins are going to beat the Bills and knock them out of the playoffs entirely. And I believe that will cost Sean McDermott his job. It was saved for a minute when they beat the Chiefs, went in, blew Dallas out, and they've won a couple of games now to claw their way back in, but it's too little too late. I think McDermott is going to be shown the door. He had some controversial comments that came to light from a few years ago. I think the Buffalo front office was kind of itching for a reason to get rid of him. They already fired a coordinator to get Joe Brady in, and now, we have all of this info. McDermott off of a leak. McDermott making some 9/11 comments and terrorist jacking in an attempt to motivate the team. That was a huge story before this podcast started, which we would have covered. But I think, like I said, the Bills front office, I think, would like to get rid of McDermott, and them missing the playoffs would just make it a real easier time for them versus winning the division again. So after that, we're going to shift into the Steelers part of things, which I alluded to earlier. I believe the Steelers win in against Baltimore. Mason Rudolph has been doing really good. It wasn't just a Christmas miracle in that time of the year. He's played good the past 2 weeks. He's got them in winning position. Kenny Pickett is healthy, and they're electing to stay with Mason Rudolph over Kenny Pickett as of right now. Now, if they make the playoffs, who knows who that starting quarterback is. I believe they would be the 7 seed going into it, which they would have to go then to the Dolphins, which we'll talk about that when I get into previewing the playoffs based on how I think things will go. But the Steelers, I believe, will beat the Ravens. The Bills losing will make the Steelers the 7 seed. And that's how I believe the top and the bottom of that AFC is going to work out. Now, we're going to have to take some time again to discuss the absolute tire fire, even though they're all 9-7, that is the South. A couple weeks ago, my first prediction was that the Colts were going to win the South, and then they come out flat against the Falcons. They're able to rally though, and right now everybody is tied up at 9-7. Right now, due to the tiebreakers, the Jags lead the division. They have to play the Tennessee Titans and potentially Mike Vrabel's last game with that organization. When we get, to the playoffs and maybe a little bit after, there's a thing called Black Monday. It's a term where a lot of coaches, that's when the firings first happen and coming out. I've seen a lot of reports. For sure, 2 coaches will be fired this following Monday after Week 18 concludes, and when we'll have all that information and covered when that happens. But for sure, I've heard through sources and other coverage outlets that 2 NFL coaches are fired first thing Monday morning. So right now, the Jaguars, like I said, are in there as the division winner right now, with the Texans playing the Colts and the Jaguars playing the Titans. I believe the Jaguars should beat the Titans right now. Lawrence will be back healthy. They shut out the Panthers, which at this point is not saying much. That organization is in a free fall of turmoil. The Panthers, that is. And we are looking at a Jaguars team that needed that win really bad, got it. They got CJ Beathard. Now they're kind of going into a Titans team that's got one foot out the door to Cancun with, the only threat is if Vrabel is really coaching to try to get one last win before he potentially leaves the Titans organization. And then the other more interesting thing is the Houston Texans versus the Colts. And this is where we got to start kind of breaking down how these teams can make the playoffs versus win the division. The Texans beat the Colts. The Jaguars lose to the Titans. I believe both of these are the Jaguars have to lose to obviously get the division title. But Texans win, Jaguars lose. They get the division. The Texans win over the Colts. They also guarantee the playoffs due to the tiebreakers, both of them being 9-7, and for that potential 6-7 seed. The winner of this game is at least guaranteed the wild card. The Colts' perspective on this: if they win and Jacksonville loses, they'll win the division. And if they win with a Pittsburgh loss, then the Colts will make the playoffs. And as far as the Jacksonville Jaguars are concerned, if you win, you're in. And I believe if I looked at it earlier, I did not have it written down because it got into a lot of win-lose stuff, and that's a lot to just kind of keep memorized right here. But the Jacksonville Jaguars win. I believe the Steelers lose, as well as I believe the Texans lose, and they still make the playoffs because we get into some wonky tie-breaking procedures kind of in that little area with everybody tied. But I'm going to give you my full AFC playoff predictions and standings right now, how we're going to go into week 1 of the playoffs. Obviously, like I covered at the top of the show, top of the segment, number 1, Baltimore Ravens. And what I am officially saying is number 2, the Miami Dolphins. Number 3, the Kansas City Chiefs. Number 4, I do believe, even though I did say the Colts were going to win the division, new evidence has come out. Colts drop a huge game they really, really needed. I think the Jaguars win the South. They'll win this weekend, so I'm going to have the Jaguars as your 4 seed. The Cleveland Browns locked into 5th seed. I believe the Colts edge out the Texans in a really good game. The Colts will be your 6th seed, and like I have said earlier in the Dolphins-Bills discussion, later into the Steelers part of it, the Steelers will be your 7th seed going into the playoffs. And I will go over those when I get to predicting off my setup how I believe the playoffs will go in the matchup in the first round. So we're going to shift now over to the NFC side of things. As we go over this right here, the San Francisco 49ers, like I said, They top the division, get the first round bye. They're going to be resting starters for sure. I know they're resting Brock Purdy and Christian McCaffrey, who's nursing a calf injury right now. They're going to try to get them 100% healthy for the playoffs and ready to go. Injury's been a huge part of the 49ers for the better part of 5 years, it feels like now. They can never just stay healthy because they play such a physical brand of football. Number 2 is either going to be Dallas or Philadelphia, thanks to Dallas winning with very controversial circumstances from the Detroit Lions and the officiating, and the Arizona Cardinals majorly upsetting the Philadelphia Eagles in Philadelphia. Right now, Dallas leads that division with Philadelphia being the 5 seed. The 3 seed, pretty much locked into it, is the Detroit Lions. Whoever wins the wonky division of also the NFC South, just something about the South this year, it's just wonky on both sides. Nobody really wants to win it. And your 5 seed will either be Dallas or Philadelphia, depending on how this week turns out. And we'll get into those predictions and projections here in a minute or two. 6 seed locked in is the Rams. They've already said they're going to be sitting Matthew Stafford to start Carson Wentz to avoid some injuries there. Look for some more of those players to probably be held out, as Sean McVay has no issue benching multiple starters in this kind of a situation. And at the 7th seed, right now is Green Bay. But as we'll kind of get into this a little bit more, Green Bay, Seattle, Tampa Bay, Atlanta, and somehow the Minnesota Vikings are all still alive for that 7 seed. The bottom of the NFC is a little bit of a mess. But let's shift into the 2 seed discussion. Dallas holds it right now, and they go to Washington to play the Commanders in Ron Rivera's 99% likely last game with the Commanders. The Cowboys should win that game. They should win it, whether it's by 1 or by 30. They rolled the Commanders earlier in the season on Thanksgiving. There is no reason why Dallas should lose. However, we said that about Philadelphia and Arizona. So, Dallas loses that game by some miracle, then Philly, if they beat the Giants, they almost lost to them 2 weeks ago now, they could potentially win the division. But the way I have things right now, I think Dallas takes care of business, even though I'm not really a Cowboys believer when it comes to the playoffs. I think they're a little more buttoned up. I think Philadelphia is leaking water very badly. That coach might be on a sneaky hot seat. I know it sounds crazy, but a lot of reports coming out of the organization, the way they're kind of downward spiraling. They fire but not fire their defensive coordinator from Matt Patricia. The defense doesn't really get any better. Players are starting to kind of chip and be a little bit more outspoken. I think if Philly goes one and done, he may not get fired, but he might start getting on a hot seat. Philadelphia is a notorious hard market. They can turn on you pretty quick, and having lost that Super Bowl instead of winning it, I don't think he has a very long leash, and it could tighten up, especially because the issues with Philadelphia last season kind of came into bigger fruitions this season with that defense really regressing, losing both coordinators, and there could just be a little bit more turmoil, and they're going to have to start maybe paying a few more people, might start losing some more pieces. So I think Philly's just trying to bail water. I think Dallas, with some more assurances, I think they'll play a little bit less desperate, more of a cohesive game against against the Commanders. And I'm going to have Dallas winning the NFC East. And then which will shove Philadelphia into the 5 seed and have to go play the winner of the NFC South. So, we're going to shift now to said NFC South. Tampa Bay got pretty much routed. They kind of had a chance late, kind of didn't onside kick. It's very hard to get those anymore. But Tampa loses to the Saints, and that allowed the Saints to kind of get back into it. Atlanta also winning has allowed Atlanta to kind of be in it. They're almost running the exact parallel to the AFC South. Um, Tampa wins and they're in. For basically 2 weeks, it was win and you're in. Tampa has to play Carolina. If they don't beat Carolina, everybody might get fired in Tampa. Even though what would have been looked as a good season, you can't lose to the worst team in the NFL like that to win the division, or lose and basically probably be out of the playoffs. But there was also, if they do somehow lose, the winner of New Orleans and Atlanta will be into playoffs. So that turns that New Orleans Saints and Atlanta Falcons matchup. That's kind of a big matchup, depending on what happens with Tampa Bay. But like I said, I think this week for sure Tampa Bay gets the job done. They go into the playoffs, hosting Philadelphia. Saints and Falcons will probably be out of the playoffs. I'll get kind of into some of those here in a minute when I talk about the 7 seed and how that's kind of shaking out right now. But Tampa Bay should be the 4 seed. If for some reason they lose, I do believe the Saints will beat Atlanta in that game, even though I don't think it'll mean anything for the playoffs. But if somehow Baker gets hurt in that game or something wild just happens and Tampa loses, the Saints would win that division if somehow Tampa doesn't win. Because I do believe the Saints will go into Atlanta, beat Atlanta. So they got the top 4 right now: Niners, Dallas, Lions, and Tampa. 5 seed Philadelphia, 6 seed locked into it Rams. The 7 seed is currently Green Bay, but the Seattle Seahawks are also viable for it right now. Seattle gets in with a Green Bay loss and a Seattle win. Green Bay is playing the Chicago Bears. The Seattle Seahawks are playing the Arizona Cardinals. The Saints get in with a win and needing Green Bay and Seattle to both lose. So the Saints needs a lot of outside help. Same thing with the Falcons. If the Falcons on the flip side beat the Saints, then they still need that same amount of help. The winner of that Saints Atlanta game needs the same amount of help one way or the other. The Vikings technically can still get in, but they would need a lot of help also. That I didn't even look at that scenario because the Vikings are 7-9. It's one of those where I believe the Saints and Falcons game had to end in a tie or something. That was just an odd sequence, so we're not gonna. Mathematically, they're there, but we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. I did my due diligence. Yes, technically, Minnesota is also alive. But between Green Bay playing Chicago, Seattle playing the Cardinals, I've really narrowed it down to those 2 teams. In my personal opinion, Fields is still trying to play super hard to either show he deserves to stay in Chicago. Eberflus is wanting to show he wants to stay in and coach the Bears. Front office looking at a lot of things. Fields is showing he still has a lot of value, which I believe he has to this point, but this is a perfect opportunity. Shades of last year with Green Bay, winning you're in the last minute of the week against a potentially surging team right now in the Bears, who've put together a couple of wins. I know it does sound wild, but I think the Chicago Bears will beat the Green Bay Packers, allowing the Seattle Seahawks to slide in to the 7th seed, because the Green Bay defense is horrible. They're not doing a good job. They let Bryce Young hang 30 on them. Now, they win that game, but they hang 30 on them. And I think a lot of pressure this young of a team. We kind of saw it last year with Rodgers. They just couldn't answer the bell. And I think Jordan Love in this situation, I don't think he answers the bell either. I think Green Bay will lose to the Bears in a huge upset, and the Seattle Seahawks will beat the Cardinals and make the 7th seed. So, as it sits right now, I'm going to go over everything right now. My projected standings after this week for the NFC will be the San Francisco 49ers at the 1 seed, obviously. The Dallas Cowboys is the 2 seed. Lions at the 3 seed. Buccaneers is the 4 seed. Philly is 5. Rams at 6. Seattle at 7. And before I shift to discussing those playoff matchups, I do want to touch on the college football playoffs, which took place this past weekend. I had originally predicted Alabama, Texas, just they win games, it's what they do, and Harbaugh had been choking games in the bowls for forever. But Michigan barely edges out Alabama. Washington holds off on Texas, and we have a Michigan-Washington College Football National Championship. Both games were very good games. Both games were really good games. Obviously, Michigan-Alabama went to overtime. Michigan special teams were just atrocious, but these are college kids. These aren't super duper professionals. Yeah, they've been playing, but I'm not as surprised that it happened as if this would have happened to an NFL team in this kind of a spot. These are, like I said, still kids in football terms. But right now, Michigan versus Washington for the national championship. My personal prediction, Washington, I believe, will beat Michigan and be the national champion. That is my preview, and that's kind of what I hope would happen. I think it would be better for the sport, have the Washington Huskies win the national championship. They've got a lot of good receivers. I think they can put a lot of pressure on the Michigan defense, and I think it'll be a decently scoring affair. I'll take Washington winning 27-24. I think it'll be a close game. It should be another good game. But yeah, I'm going to take Washington's offense to just barely be able to overpower and outgun the Michigan offense with J.J. McCarthy and Jim Harbaugh at the helm. So we're going to shift gears here. I'm going to discuss the first round of the playoffs as I see them projected out. The way I have them projected out should be the Dolphins will host the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Chiefs will host the Colts, and the Jaguars will host the Browns on the AFC side. The Dolphins against a physical team, typically, I would almost take the physical team as an underdog. But with the Steelers, Tomlin, for a long time, they fall flat in the playoffs. They just, for whatever reason, they keep falling out flat. And I think the Dolphins have too much firepower on that offense for the playoffs to be able to lose to the Steelers. Unless Tua gets hurt or something else, I believe the Dolphins would win that matchup. As far as I'm concerned, like I said, I do think the Dolphins would win that matchup. Waddle may be out for that game, although I think he is. I think I read somewhere he might play this week, but I know that Ravens game took out a lot of people. Bradley Chubb or Nick Chubb, their defensive player for the Dolphins, is out with I believe it was ACL or Achilles tear. So that defense is going to be weaker, which would open the door for a Steelers upset with, Pickens, and if Rudolph stays hot and they keep with Rudolph. That game will probably be close. But I do think the Dolphins could beat the Steelers. And I do think they will in that case. Now, as we get to the Chiefs and the Colts are a really good story. But I think against that Chiefs defense and the Chiefs offense needing it, like, obviously, the playoffs will have to. But the way the Chiefs' offense will be, in my opinion, Pacheco should be a little bit more healthy. Mahomes will have a week of rest, kind of. Kelsey will probably have most of a week off. I know he needs about 15 or 16 yards this potential week to hit 1,000 yards. I don't know if he cares about that, or if he does, they'll get it to him and he'll be out probably right after that. But Kelsey will be on some rest. Jaguars, Browns, I've talked about this at length last week. The Browns should beat the Jaguars. They'll beat whoever wins the South. That's what I believe, and I believe a lot of other people are also on board with that idea. But the Browns beats the Jaguars in the first round. So to recap the AFC side, I'm going to have the Dolphins in a good game. The Chiefs will beat the Colts, and then the Browns will probably just roll right over the Jaguars. We're going to shift to the NFC side of things. The Dallas Cowboys will host the Seattle Seahawks. Lions will host the Rams and Matthew Stafford on his homecoming. Tampa Bay will host Philadelphia. Once again, these are all my projections of how it goes this week. Dallas and Seattle, they played kind of close last time, I believe. It was a surprising game, a lot of penalties. With Geno or Drew or whoever starts that game, I know Geno should be back in the lineup, but you never know how things go. In the NFL, injury-wise, we saw that last week and really for most of the season. I would take Dallas to win. They've played them once. Dallas is a good team, and I do believe they would beat, even if Green Bay gets in that slot, and I'm wrong about that prediction, they should be able to handle whoever they play in that wild card slot. And if they don't, a lot of people are probably going to get fired there also. Sorry about all the drinking. I've got just a little bit of a dry throat today. The Lions hosting the Rams. Matthew Stafford, I believe that would be his first game back in Ford Field since becoming a Ram. That's a difficult matchup for both teams when you think about it. The Lions on pass rush. They have Aiden Hutchinson, but I think the offensive line might hold up for the Rams long enough for him to kind of take care of a secondary that may be a little bit weaker than given credit for. The Rams' defense, they might have a hard time keeping the Lions in check with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Williams, Gibson, all those running backs. It's also in a dome, which Goff obviously thrives in domes. In that matchup, that's a very, very tough matchup. A lot of emotion in that game. Obviously, Dan Campbell getting that team to win the division for the first time in a long time. I would go with the Lions in a very close game. That is a coin flip game. I wouldn't blame you if you took the Rams going in with an upset. Like I said, in my belief, I think the Lions are just good enough, and Dan Campbell has just enough of that secret spice to get the Lions to go past the Rams. Tampa Bay hosting Philadelphia. I'll say it right now, I believed in Tampa all year with Baker Mayfield. I'm not going to stop now. I would take Tampa Bay to upset Philadelphia. Philadelphia's reeling. Even if they beat the Giants, I just think Tampa Bay, the second crack at Philly. I think Philly's a little bit worse now than when they played them originally. And I would just take Philadelphia to lose on the road against Tampa Bay. I know it sounds crazy, but like I said, I think Philadelphia is bailing water. Todd Bowles with his second crack at slowing down that offense. Baker Mayfield, a second crack at that even now more suspect defense. Might be able to do a few other things a little bit better. So that's how I see this going out. I believe the Finns over the Steelers, Chiefs over the Colts, Browns over the Jaguars, Dallas over Seattle, Lions over the Rams, Tampa Bay over Philly. So, I would also, that's going to conclude kind of talking about week 16, or not 16, my apologies, 17, 18, and the Michigan-Washington talk for the college football championships. Well, obviously, we'll be back next week, see where I was right, see where I was wrong. Uh, as we go into the playoffs, like I said, we're going to have a coaching tracker going on. We're going to give you all the up-to-date information on that next week. As we go, we'll really dig harder into the matchups. We'll see where I was right, see where I was wrong with my projections. Um, we'll keep track of the coaching, who's hired, who's fired. We'll kind of give you some injury updates on probably a few very key players. And as the playoffs move forward, we'll start discussing draft order, who we think people should and shouldn't draft. We'll give you some cap situations and kind of give you a preview of the next maybe few months of this podcast. We'll probably go division by division, AFC, NFC, North, South, East, West, and we'll break down every team's off-season situation with their cap and what I think they should and shouldn't do. As well as probably talk a few other sports. We'll probably talk some March Madness too when that comes around. That's kind of a look into the future. So that's going to conclude this week's episode of the Fifth Down Podcast. We encourage you guys to like, to comment, subscribe, give us some feedback, share this around, trying to make the podcast grow. I've gotten some feedback already, so I appreciate that. So if you guys just want to keep doing that, keep spreading the word, and just keep on watching, keep on listening. Thank you very much.